In this video lesson, I'm going to show you how to use Capture NX2's Quick Fix tab to fix very common photo problems like these three here. For example, we've got a shot that could do with a little bit of a color boost, we've got a shot that's got some detail missing in the shadows and some blown out highlights, and we've got a shot that is underexposed, so we need to boost up the brightness there to see a better contrast. But let's kick off with the most challenging perhaps, this one here. If I double click to open it, and then click here just to open it up into a larger window like so. I can also Control Plus to zoom in for a better look. And here we've got a very high contrast scene, and the camera's metering mode is really struggling to get a balanced exposure. It's fairly overexposed here in these highlights, and it's also underexposed in the shadows because it doesn't really know what's important to us. So what we can do is use the Quick Fix tab, which if it's not already visible, you can go to the developer section here and click to open up Quick Fix, and the first thing you'll see is a histogram, but if you scroll down you've got a variety of other things like these sliders here. Now the whole point about Quick Fix is it's quick to fix the most common problems like these exposure problems, and what we need to do is reveal some more mid-tone detail down in these shadows without blowing out these highlights even more. So what I'm going to do is drag the shadow protection slider to the right, and that lightens up the shadows and the mid-tones, and you can see much more detail. It's as if we've got a giant flash mounted on the camera now, so we can just fill in these underexposed shaded areas. So around about a value of around 44 should do the trick for this particular challenge. Now when we adjusted that slider, we changed the way the tones are showing in the shot, and that will change this histogram. Let me just scroll back up to the top here, and let's just tick here to turn Quick Fix off. Watch what happens to this histogram. Click, and you can see that lots of mid-tone detail that was peaking here has slid down towards the left there to show much more shadow detail. The graph's really peaking up towards the shadow end at the left, but if we turn it on again, you can see that the shadows are less strong, but we've got much more mid-tone detail. So that's quite a good idea to keep an eye on the histogram, and that gives you a helpful display about the spread of the shot's tones. And at the moment we've got some shadows, lots of mid-tones, and some nice strong highlights as well. Talking of highlights, they are peaking quite strongly at the far right, and indeed in this window here in the Quick Fix tab. So I'm going to just scroll down and choose some highlight protection. If I drag this slider to the right, watch the highlights in the histogram here. They should start to dip down a little bit and go more towards the middle, and that's a good way of just protecting the highlights. So if we take that up to around about 52, there we go, we can type in the value in this box if we like, and that is actually clawing back more highlight detail. We can now see some shadows here, and indeed if I Control Plus to zoom in a bit more and hit the space bar and drag, we've also got some brickwork that was missing from the original picture. So let me just turn off Quick Fix to show you the before. Very blown out indeed, and the highlights are very peaky. And let's turn it on again, and you can see the highlights slide more towards the midtones, and we've got much more highlight detail. So this is a really powerful way of actually revealing missing highlights and missing shadows at the same time, just by dragging a couple of sliders to the right. So I'm happy with that now. I'm just going to click on the navigator to zoom back out, and I'm going to click here to close this file. And yes, I would like to save the changes as a high quality JPEG. Okay, so that's one problem. Let's move on to another one, and here we have a shot that's just simply underexposed. So if we just drag that into the main work area, that will open up like so, and I'll show you a cool and quick way to fix exposure using levels. Okay, so here we have our histogram in the Quick Fix window, and if we just go and have a look here, you can see that the levels are very strong on the shadows, lots of midtones, but the highlights fizzle out well before the far right of the histogram. But we can simply remap things by dragging this highlight input level slider to the left, and if we remap it by taking it under the graph, we're actually taking the shot's brightest details now, and we're making them even brighter to give them a much healthier highlight level. And now I can drag up to the top here and turn Quick Fix off. Watch the bottom histogram, the colourful one at the very bottom there. Click. There's the before, very underexposed. The highlights don't reach the far right. But now that we've remapped them, then you can see that it stretches now from the shadows to the left all the way to the highlights at the right. So this is a much healthier looking histogram, and the shot indeed looks much healthier too. But we can fine tune things a wee bit more using some of these other sliders like contrast. If we just drag this one to the right to around about 20, then we get darker shadows and slightly brighter highlights as well. So you need to keep an eye up here and maybe just remap this a little bit just to make sure that the highlights aren't going to be clipped and blown out. Let's just go back a little bit, and if you want to see if there's any blown out highlights, what you can do is press Shift and H, and that will show you any clipped highlights as patches of colour like we have here. So what I can do is just drag this slider to the right so that it's just under the graph, and we've got less blown out or less clipped highlights. Basically a clipped highlight or a clipped shadow will print out as pure white for the highlights and pure black for the shadows. Then don't forget to press Shift and H to turn off that highlight clipping warning. And one of the cool things about this histogram up here is you can use it to fine-tune the midtones. If they're slightly underexposed, for example, if you just click the midtone slider, drag it to the left, then you can brighten up the shot's midtones, but you've still got lovely black shadows and nice strong white highlights. So the shot's got a much healthier range of tones, but you can also double check that the shadows aren't too clipped as well by pressing Shift and S, and that shows any clipped shadows as patches of colour. There's a little bit of a clip here, but if you press Shift and S again, it's just a bit of this chap here walking in, so he's very dark, but he's not an important area. In fact, it might even benefit cropping out this area of the shot to improve the composition and get rid of distracting things like this fellow here. So that's a cool way of just tweaking the tones to fix an underexposed photograph, and it's quite a dramatic change, as you can see when we turn off this box here to see the before, very dull, underexposed, turn it on again to see the after version. And finally, we're just going to drag down and boost the saturation just to give the shot a little bit more of a kick with some brighter colours there. So I can click here to close and save my modified image, and we'll look at a third problem here and a third way to change the tones. Let me just open up this one here. This isn't too bad from an exposure point of view, but I'm just going to show you other ways to fix exposure. We'll use these sliders here, the highlight and the midtone sliders, to tweak things before, but you can see this one's got a healthy range of shadows, midtones and highlights. The graph stretches all the way across the histogram. We also use these sliders here to fine-tune things, to lighten up the detail in the shadows and to reveal lost detail in the highlights. But there's one more way to tweak the tones of a shot. You can just click here to give the shadows or the highlights an edit by placing a point on the curve. So I click and drag down near the bottom, which is the shadow section of the graph, and the curve as well, and drag down like so. Then the curve starts to dip down towards the bottom, and that darkens the shadows in the shot. I could pop up a point up here and click and then push up to brighten the highlights as well, but I don't want to blow those out and create overexposed highlights. So that's another way to control tones, by placing points on the curve and dragging up to brighten things or down to darken them. Now, a word of caution about curves. Because you can add as many points as you'd like, there's a real danger of things going out of control, and they're very, very difficult to control if you're not used to them. It's very easy to create clipped shadows or clipped highlights. So you might want to tweak things with a curve a little bit and then move down and work with these other sliders to just reveal some detail in these rather bright highlights. I'm sure there's some brickwork we can get back by dragging highlight protection to the right, and you can see there that's got rid of that brighter edge that we had before. We've now got a little bit more hint of texture and detail there. And finally, I'm just going to boost the colours in the shot as well by going to saturation and dragging to the right, just to bring out these vibrant orange colours on the roof. So let me just pop back down to zoom out so we can see the shot in its entirety, and I just want to compare the before and after, so that even a fairly healthily exposed shot can benefit from a little bit of tweaking with the tones and the colours like so.